Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Maurya with us. Ash, thanks for coming on the program again.
Thanks, Bronson. It's a pleasure always.
Absolutely. I love having you on because you're one of those guests that are deep. You have thoughts that you've thought through for a long time. You're not just coming on here giving opinions off the cuff. These are some things you've really worked through. But let me tell people a little bit about you. You are one of the OGs of the lean startup movement. Actually, you wrote, if I'm not mistaken, you wrote the first book on lean startups. And,
Technically, yes.
Yeah, technically, yes, right? And now I think you've done it again because you have a new book coming out this month called Scaling Lean. And I was actually lucky enough to get an advanced copy of it. I shouldn't say lucky enough. Ash is nice enough that I got an advanced copy of it. And I think this is going to be a must read for modern entrepreneurs. But I'll let you walk us through why that is as we talk here. But first, the question I want to ask is, why did you feel the need to write a book about scaling a lean startup? What was the reasoning there?
Sure. So I think a lot of my process is really immersing myself in the problem, maybe what you were alluding to early on. So since the book, since the Lean Startup and the book Running Lean came out, I found that the big message there was really getting people outside the building. It was really trying to get the entrepreneur to have this big mind shift where it wasn't just about the solution, what I sometimes call the entrepreneur's bias or the innovator's bias, but really getting outside and testing, validating the idea. And then I found since that came out, we got enough people outside, and then they came back inside, went to their stakeholders and said, look at all the learning I've done. And the stakeholders said, well, I don't see the business model. So it's great that you're talking to people and you've talked to 10 people, but I don't know what that means. I don't know if this is going to work. And so it was a valid objection. And so in this second book, I switched focus. And so it's still a very entrepreneur book written by an entrepreneur for entrepreneurs, but it's really how do you have that conversation with stakeholders? And I count the entrepreneur themselves as the most important stakeholder because they are investing with their time. So how do you test whether your idea in the early stages is even worth pursuing? And then, it just kind of builds up from there.
Yeah, and I can say this firsthand. I'm someone who's recently raised money for a startup, and there's places in the book where you say, this is how the venture capitalists are viewing this conversation. This is how they see the world. And I can say that is 100% accurate. That I come in excited about the features, excited about the product, and they're saying, how big's the market? What's the business model? Do we have any proof that those features matter? And so we're coming at it from different sides. And this book is almost like a translation guide, how to hear what the VCs are saying and for them to hear what we're saying.
Right, and that's what I find funny is that the investors don't really tell you what they need. So they ask, what they're looking for. The entrepreneurs kind of keep digging deeper into, here's my tech, here's my solution, and no one's really talking to each other. And so I call it the dichotomy of progress stories. We have two stories that are playing in that room and no one's communicating. And so how do we really turn that language? And so this is where I start with what is it that both entrepreneurs and investors want? And to me, that's traction. Now, traction is one of those things that we both say, yes, we want. Again, easy to say, yes, I want this, but not that easy to communicate it. So the book really starts with the definition and then kind of peels the layers from there.
And I think that's an important point because a lot of people say traction matters, right? But you actually say why traction matters. It's because traction shows the proof that there might be a business model here, that there might be a bigger market here. It's not just like, hey, we got some momentum, so let's be excited about momentum. It's momentum towards something that the VCs are looking for, correct?
Yeah. And I think that the key point there is that it's really about show me leading indicators for future growth. Mm-hmm. So if I came to you and said a stock, let's just pick Apple or Tesla, whatever you want, it's doing X, will you buy it? And that's kind of a dumb question. You would say, well, let me go and look at its past performance. Let me look at where they are, where they're going to go, and then I'm going to invest on that basis. But as so when we just look at metrics, we look at a single data point and say, wow, the startup's doing really well. And that could be the case, but maybe they've hit the S curve and they're not going anywhere. So they're not still investable. And we see lots of companies get stuck. So to me, traction is really more about the conversation of here's where I am, but here's where we can go, and that's the story you want to tell.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, with traction, you talk in your book about vanity metrics, right? Because you can show certain metrics that always go up and to the right because they're vanity metrics. Walk me through that. What is a vanity metric?
Yeah, they're metrics we kind of tell ourselves and we fool ourselves kind of on the basis of it. But I would say that it's not so much the metric that's vanity or actionable, but rather how we measure it. So the classic vanity metric is the cumulative number of anything. So cumulative number of signups. If I look at all my users since the beginning of time, that number, since it's an additive product outcome, it cannot go down. It can only flatline or go up. And so I can just show this curve looking like traction. I can show all the people who have come and used our product. But that's if I plot that same graph as a monthly sign up rate, I'll begin to see that maybe it's actually flatline. Maybe my sign up rate's the same, or it's actually going down. And that's the more actionable kind of information you want to present.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, in the book, you have kind of your traction model, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this. You say it has three parts to it: problem solution fit, problem market fit, and then scale. Let's talk about each one of those because I feel like this gets to the heart of what entrepreneurs are trying to accomplish. So problem solution fit's the first one. What is that?
Yeah, so maybe I'll set the context up in the beginning. So oftentimes when entrepreneurs go, they're always thinking about scale. And premature scaling is one of, as you know, we've probably talked about in the show many times, but it's the top killer of ideas, top killer of startups, because we're just chasing this outcome that's so far in the future, and we end up trying to optimize everything and end up having suboptimal results at the end. So what I started talking about even in the first book is this idea of a staged approach. So problem solution fit is really about building the foundation of the business model right. So it really starts with, if you've got a solution in mind, great. If you don't have one, you still need to start with who are you going to serve? So who's the customer? What problems are you solving? And then third part, even more important, how are they solving those problems today? So if there's a problem out there that's monetizable, but no one's attempting to solve it, doesn't mean there is an opportunity there, but it could be one that there's a reason why no one's doing it. Maybe there's too much behavior change involved. So that's what problem solution fit is about. How does your solution fit with your customer's problem? And you can test that oftentimes very qualitatively. You go out there, you can do customer interviews, you can show them some demos, you can drive them to landing pages, show them the offer. And so we get that qualitative kind of validation. The way I like to say is that if you can wave a magic wand and pretend you've built this thing and you go and tell people, here, I have it, and no one's interested, that's a big red flag. If on the other hand, people say, oh, I want this, and you have the opposite problem where you can't really deliver on time, you can do that in small scale and convince yourself, okay, it's worth building after that. So that's what problem solution fit is all about. Then product market fit is often when you have built that first iteration, what in the lean startup we call the minimum viable product. You put that out there, it's probably not going to be a perfect product, so you're going to iterate and get it to a point where it is really delivering on value. So whether it's a piece of software, a service, you start to iterate, and you're still doing it. In all of this, you're going from small scale of customers, and you're gradually kind of leveling up. So in your product market fit stage, you're not again trying to scale prematurely. You're not trying to get everyone, because what if your solution's not yet right enough or good enough? You will just bring everyone and they'll leave the party. So when you get kind of enough of that tipping point, enough of the critical mass, that's product market fit. And then our strategy shifts. It's less about perfecting the product and more about scale. So that's where when we talk of growth hacking, that's even, you'll often hear that it's really at product market fit or after product market fit that a lot of the growth hacking types of tactics and strategies are really best applied. So you're really focused on growing versus figuring out the business model.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that problem solution fit, you're dealing with the world of ideas? Here's the idea of what this thing will do. Tell me the idea if you think it'll solve your problem. It's just words, and there's nothing real concrete to sink our teeth into. And then we move into problem market fit, and it's okay, here's an MVP. It's a real thing that has real features. You can actually use it. It's not great yet. There's a lot wrong with it. But let's see if what we thought in the world of ideas actually translates to the world of UI and features and that kind of thing. And then if it translates, you get to scale and you really figure out how now to get this to as many people as possible. Is that the process?
Sure. So I would say in problem solution fit, I look at the output as being an offer. So the offer is something that you tell your prospects.
Yeah.
And if they raise their hands and say, I'm interested, and enough of them do, then you've got something. So if you were going to an investor or a stakeholder, you would maybe go and say, I ran this landing page and look at all the email signups I got. So these are people who are interested. At least that's a leading indicator. If you had zero people interested, we know that they're not, even if you had the product, they wouldn't get it. So that's what you test in problem solution fit. As you said, product market fit is about the MVP and kind of getting it to a point where the product is working in small scale. Mm-hmm. And then in the scale stage, to me, the output there is the growth engine. Can you go and show the business model and the kind of equation for how you will grow? And that's what kind of you'll get the stakeholders to invest in.
Yeah, I like that. It's interesting. Right now, I'm actually getting feedback on a problem solution fit thing that I'm working through. And I didn't create a landing page. I didn't put any dev into it at all. I literally met people at Starbucks, told them verbally what it's going to do, and then I showed them an Excel file with a make-believe payment package. And it's like, look, you can have package 1, 2, 3, or 4. Which one do you want? And they go get their credit card and tell me which one they want, and I manually type it in Stripe. And that's it. And
that's
so,
awesome.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that's a classic. I mean, that's an art of the demo, right? So I look at the demo as being the smallest thing that you should do to get your idea across.
Yeah.
So in your case, you didn't even do a landing page, and that's awesome because you could just describe it.
Well, when we had a discussion about it, we thought, well, let's at least do a landing page. I mean, who's going to hand over a credit card just because you say something that everyone knows doesn't exist? And then we thought, yeah, but how many hours is a landing going to cost? Is it going to cost any money? Or let's just say it, because if they can't get excited with a few sentences, one landing page may not change that. And so we really just did it as lean as possible. But then, just in the course of a day or two, we got 6 credit cards on file just from conversations. And we thought, okay, there's something here.
Sure.
Now let's go a little further. So now we have the dev starting to put together a little MVP to see if we can move to the next step. So I didn't know we were doing it the right way. So it makes me feel good talking to you.
No, I almost always, and so this is again one of the innovators' bias, but they always rush towards building things. Landing pages are also building, and that can take you days, as you said. And oftentimes I'll push them to go and have a conversation, because the problem with a landing page and with metrics in general is that you can tell whether people are clicking or not clicking, but you never get to why. Even the people who are clicking, you don't know who they really are for sure. They could be a bot. Yeah. So you have no idea who's behind on the other side. But when you go talk to someone, it's a real conversation. You ask questions, they ask you questions. You learn a lot more in that process.
It's so true. Even that make-believe payment package page, the first one I showed, they were like, oh, that's way too expensive. I'm like, oh, let me change it. So I just changed it. I was like, does that look better? And they're like, yeah, it's a little better. I was like, great. And then they bought one of those. And then I go to the next person, and they're like, yeah, I like that package. This one doesn't make any sense. I'm like, does it now? We changed features on it. And so like the packages literally morphed over the course of a couple days. They were nothing like what I showed the first person to what I showed the last person. But the last one was like, wow, this is way better, because people were just ripping into it. And it was an Excel doc. I wasn't married to it. I didn't care what was on it. We were just playing with numbers,
Absolutely.
It felt fluid. So the process felt better, that's for sure. Now, another thing you talk about in the book, you have a whole section called The Art of the Scientist. Normally we think of science as not an art. So what do you mean by the art of a scientist? What are you referring to there?
Yeah, so again, maybe just to set context, a lot of the lean startup was influenced by lean thinking, which was heavily baked in the scientific method. So Eric Ries kind of is known for saying a startup is an experiment. And so he draws a lot of those parallels. But what I found, so for this second book, I said, let's go and figure out what scientists really do. They run experiments. Let's go figure that out. And I found that wasn't the most important thing they did. And a lot of the scientists would point me to Einstein and said, he never ran an experiment. He was actually terrible at running experiments. Mm-hmm. And so I said, well, what do they do then? And I realized that what they really do is they build models. So they start with problems. There's something they're trying to explore, and they build a model. And that model helps them predict certain outcomes. So they compute some consequences, and then they use experiments to validate or invalidate that. So the most important thing is really starting with the model. And then I draw that same parallel with with entrepreneurs, and we do the same thing. We start with the business model. And if you don't, you should. So that's the kind of the key learning there, is that just experimenting your way to greatness often doesn't work because you don't quite know your goal. You don't quite understand the dynamics of what you should be testing. So in the first book, I introduced this Lean Canvas one-pager, which was essentially a one-page business model. It's not the only one, but it's the one that is close to me, so I'll mention that one.
Sure.
But it essentially describes the whole business on a single page. And so that to me is how we start with the model. And it could be all wrong, but at least you've got a business model story now. Mm-hmm. Then we go run experiments to test them. So the experiments come second. And so that chapter kind of starts with the model, and then it goes into some of the ground rules. When you do start running experiments, how to think like a scientist. And even there are lots of pitfalls to avoid.
Yeah, see, I love this so much. I'm actually a science nerd. I'm an armchair physicist in my free time. And, I've always thought that, like, if you just go out and run experiments, there's no boundaries to what the experiments are or what they're testing. Einstein wasn't just like, hey, let's go play with light today, and then tomorrow gravity, and then the next day let's play with something totally unrelated. To him, he would have mental models of what would happen if a human was on a train and the train was moving at the speed of light. And like, he had these ideas that then he would, go and work with, and it put the boundaries on everything. And I think as entrepreneurs, we talk about, build, measure, learn, the Eric Ries stuff, and everything's an experiment. And I think some people misunderstand, and they just try stuff and see what works, like throwing spaghetti against a wall. And that's not the goal. Yeah. Like, you have to have an opinion on the world, and then you test to see if your opinion is correct, if your model is correct, not just trying random stuff, right?
Right. That's exactly right. So you have to start with the model. But to me, the flip side is also true, is that oftentimes more of those initial models are going to be wrong. And then something else happens. So you see entrepreneurs, when they hit failure, they start running away from it. So they'll use, again, borrowing this lean startup term, the pivot. We'll pivot away from failure. But again, a pivot not grounded in learning, if you don't understand why you failed, is a disguised see what sticks strategy. You're just throwing stuff on the wall again. And there too, I just see people buried in yet more experiments. Okay, this didn't work, let's try this. And it's a brute forcing approach, but it doesn't get you to breakthrough. So to me, when I actually see failure, I actually don't even call it failure. So I borrow Buckminster Fuller's term, it's an unexpected outcome. So I expected something else to happen and it didn't, but that's interesting. Let's figure out why that happened, right? So if no one's buying, like you said, maybe the price is too high, maybe we were talking to the wrong people, maybe no one really saw something. So to me, it's getting into those whys, and once you uncover that, that's when you can go fix things. Until then, you're just, again, randomly guessing.
Absolutely. There's no bugs, they're just features. There's no failures, they're just unexpected outcomes. Oh, I like that. So Ash, like most authors, I'm sure you have a goal when you sit down to write a book like this. What do you want to accomplish with scaling lean? What do you want to be the outcome from you writing this book?
Sure. So I'll start with kind of my bigger goal and then kind of tie that to the book. So I really got sucked into a lot of I would say becoming an author was not a master plan. It was something I kind of fell into. And so I was an entrepreneur running a different business. I started blogging about some of these ideas, got sucked into the lean startup kind of movement, if you call it that, and then wrote the first book, Running Lean, and then decided that I wanted to have some impact with entrepreneurs. That's something that really drives me. So I've been an entrepreneur many years, and that was something that I wanted to figure out for myself and then for others, is how can we raise these odds of success. So that's where the first book really came out from. And then the second book is really, as I said, a different part of that same story. I find that to be able to make entrepreneurs successful, we have to help them tell a story to their stakeholders as well. So that's why Scaling Lean. In terms of impact, we have a company, Lean Stack, and we have a goal of serving entrepreneurs, and we have a number that in mind. So for us, it's just moving towards that goal, and this is one product in many towards that end goal.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've read a lot of the book so far, and I know there's a lot of big ideas in it. There's a lot of important ideas in it. What do you think is one of the most breakthrough ideas in this book? What do you think that's really going to resonate with people that they need to hear?
Yeah, so I think the big one is starting with kind of the end in mind. And Stephen Covey said it, of course, in the 7 Habits. But how do you really apply that? So I find that a lot of people will be pushed to do financial forecasts or business plans. And to me, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm really talking about how do you build, and you use that term early on, how do you build a traction model for your idea and then hold yourself accountable to it? And of course, it's going to change and morph and evolve along the way. But just starting with that, to me, is a big step in the right direction because it allows people to figure out what the goal is, and then everything else is how do we get ourselves to that goal.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's hard to imagine something calibrating you more than that. Because if you start with the end in mind and you work backwards, you're going to make the right next decision.
Yeah.
But if you don't start with the end in mind, you can be off so easily. All right, so the last couple questions here, these are fun ones that I ask all the guests. So what are you working on as soon as this interview is over? No matter how boring it is, what's the next thing you're going to do?
So the book is launching in literally 2 weeks. So I've got tons of stuff to do around there. But one of the things that I do have to do is get a excerpt for an article. So I need to get that out this afternoon.
There you go. And then last question, what is the best advice you have for any startup that's trying to grow?
So for a startup that's trying to grow, I often will tell them that repeatability is a prerequisite to growth. And the way that I see this kind of manifesting is I talk to a lot of startups and they point to their metrics, they point to the customers they have, and I'm like, that's great, but tell me where you get your 10 next best customers from. And if they can't tell me who they're looking for and how they're going to go get them, that to me is a big red flag. So to me, you have to have a repeatable, predictable model. And if you can figure that out, growth is really about then optimizing from there.
Yeah. Well, Ash, this has been another awesome interview. I recommend everyone go and buy Scaling Lean. It's going to be an awesome read, well worth it. Ash, thanks for, again, coming on Growth Hacker TV.
Thank you, Bronson. It was a pleasure. Take care.